So today the third part of this course is starting. So we are moving to the front end of our system. So what we'll be doing in this section will be a lot of JavaScript. That will be the main language for the front end, of course. So we'll dig into JavaScript. That will be today about JavaScript and jQuery, and well, not a lot about jQuery. You have to do that yourself, but just a few words on that. And the idea is to work with something called single page application. That means that we, instead of having a number of web pages, we will dynamically change the content of the page depending on what the user is doing. So instead of having a set of pages, we have one page, and then we use Ajax to get new content, and then change the layout or the rendering of the page. We do that by using the data binding, and you have here binding a model. So we have a data model and bind that to the view. We'll be using a framework that is very good at do data binding. And then the last part will be about responsiveness. So we want to have a page that can actually be used on any device. So it should be responsive, and so it can run on and look nice on a mobile phone or a desktop computer at the same time, and also be able to be transformed into a mobile app if you want to do that. So that's the idea. We'll basically use Bootstrap. So how many of you have done HTML and JavaScript? Bootstrap. Okay, so you know, that's nice, because then I don't have to say that much about it. Morning. So that's the content of section 3. The system that we have to develop in section 3 is pretty much the same as we did in section 2. If you look at the architecture of the system, so we have. So what we did in section 2 was this one here. We did the web service. So we have this layers with the data access layer and the web service layer. That's what you did in section 2. From what we can see here in section 3, it's only the web service that you create. We cannot see what's behind the web service. Of course, you know that because you did it, but the way that the front end is talking to the back end is by use of the web service you provided. Inside the front end, we want to create yet another nicely organized application. So again, we want to separate the data access. So the data access in the front end will be how to communicate with the web service. So again, the same reasons as we did in the second section. Instead of having these access points spread around in all your JavaScript files, we want to create a service that can be used within your front end. So whenever you want to access some data, you can ask your own service. So you make an interface between this part and the upper part of the front end. That means, again, if something changed here, you only have one place to modify it. And then the presentation is the goal, of course, to get some layout of your data and the possibility for the user to interact with the system. So that's the goal. So we have a presentation here. That will be HTML. And then the business logic part here will primarily be presentation logic. So you have to keep track of what is the selected menu and blah blah blah. What is the selected blah blah blah. So you need to have some kind of logic. So that's what we are aiming at in this section here. We have 4 lectures. The first one today is about JavaScript, and we also talk JavaScript next time. And then we'll have one on responsive web design and mobile development. A little bit about that. So that will be the next 4 lectures. We want to work with unobtrusive design. So in the beginning, when we had make web pages, especially when in the beginning, when I was doing it in the beginning, was actually when the web was born back in the early 90s. You just have HTML. There was nothing else on HTML. There was no style sheet. There was no JavaScript. Yeah, it came, but nobody used it, and a lot of people thought that Java was the new black. So everybody thought that applet, that was the idea with Java, that would be how to interact with the system. But nowadays, and especially the last decade, this part has been more and more clear. So we want to separate a different part of our application. So we want something that is the content. So here we make the skeleton of our application, and then we style that with some style sheets, and we create the behavior with the JavaScript. So. And we want to separate it because we want to be able. We don't want to. We could do that. We could move everything into the HTML file, so we could inline the JavaScript and inline the styles and so. The problem is that if you create a style and you have more than one page, of course we are talking about single page applications. So that in that case you don't have a lot of pages, but anyway, having the style in one single file or number of files makes it much easier to deal with, because you don't have. It's always a problem when you have more than one thing in the same source file. So that's also the problem that we talked about in section 2. So if you have C# and SQL in the same source code, it becomes more difficult because you have 2 languages. You have a host language and then you have another language like using SQL. And it makes it more complicated. Try to do or try to look at some old PHP code, and you will see what I mean, because it's very, very complicated to. You can do a lot, but it's very. At least when I did PHP back around the millennium, it was. You could make very nice pages, but a month later you couldn't understand what you did yourself, because it was just very difficult to find a way around, because you have this mix of JavaScript, HTML, PHP, some SQL, and it was very difficult to have all the languages around. So we want to separate the different languages into the file, and then include these files into the HTML file in the end. The development tool that we will be working with is Visual Studio, so we'll just continue in Visual Studio. What I do when I'm working on the front end level is I have a mix of working on Visual Studio and Visual Studio Code, and the reason for that is just that if I don't do any back end stuff, I'm just using Visual Studio to start up my server, and then the server will provide the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and then I just move into Visual Studio Code, because it's just it's just more lightweight. It's faster to.
I think the intelligence is better.
Yeah. So I normally, when I do front end in this context here, if I'm not having C# as the backend, I will only be in Visual Studio Code. But if I have C# as the backend, because C# is easier to do C# in Visual Studio than it is in Visual Studio Code, yeah. But otherwise, you choose. You don't have to move between the two tools. Just to say that it's possible. And a lot of people do that. So, some of the stuff that we will dig into is, of course, JavaScript. We'll talk about that. jQuery is a very well-known package. We will not use that. We will not use that a lot, actually, because normally what jQuery provides is this idea of fetching objects or elements from the web page. So finding elements on the web page and do something about it, add an event handler to a button and stuff like that. So that's one of the parts that jQuery is very good at, because you can use the CSS selectors. We'll return to that later to fetch elements on your page. So but we will mainly use jQuery to do the Ajax part, because we will move into Knockout for the data binding part. Then of course Bootstrap, HTML5, CSS3, and so on. So the choice here, of course, one could argue, why not using Angular or React? Yeah, you can also do that. No problem. But I will not teach that, and it's not because I don't want to teach it. Actually, I like both of them a lot. The nice part about Knockout is, on one hand, is that it's more simple. It's only focusing on the data binding part and then some template stuff. While when you move into Angular land, you have a complete idea of how to develop an application. So you have a lot of concepts there you need to deal with. That's one problem. So it's a steep learning curve to move into Angular. Well, first, when you are there, it's fine. But there's a number of concepts you need to get into, and we don't have that time here. That's one argument. Another argument is that right now Angular is just between two versions, version 1 and version 2. So they just released version 2. And it seems like that some of the problems with version 1 is solved, or have a better interface or whatever. So so I think that could probably be an argument for actually doing Angular in a future version of this course, but not this time. Using React, that could also be the case. I actually like React a lot, so that's just another philosophy on how to deal with the front page development. I like that. It's nice. So Angular is made by Google, and React is Facebook. So it's two different ways to think about front-end development, but they of course have similarities, but also something that is very different. We'll dig a little bit into some of the stuff that they are doing in React, because we'll try to do something about the state. But anyway, we will stay in the Knockout, even though it also have some problems. So the environments, we will primarily use the browsers as, so we will use we will execute JavaScript inside the browser, because that's our goal, and we'll not move into other environments. What you can do, if you like, is using Node.js, and so that's a framework where you could do the backend in Node.js, and so you could do, and that's appealing to many people. So you have the same language on the backend and the front end. So you have JavaScript on the front end and JavaScript on the backend, and that's perfectly fine. I've done a lot of work in Node.js. It's not again, it's not easy because this asynchronous part of the language, but So when you get into that part, and you know the nature of JavaScript and the asynchronous idea of Node, then it's easy. But until then, it can be a bit complicated. There's other ways to execute JavaScript. So there's REPL. So that's the repeat, execute, print, and loop. So that's something that you can online or execute JavaScript, so you can see what will happen if you do this and this. The browsers are also providing something like that. And then there's a number of online pages where you can do JavaScript, HTML, and CSS, and one of them is JS Fiddle. It can also be, there's a lot of them. So, but we will be most in the browsers. So, for the rest of today, we'll be talking about JavaScript and also some of also the environment around the browsers. So JavaScript is a high level. This is from Wikipedia. A high level, dynamic, untyped, and interpreted programming language. Okay, let's try to dig into that. What does that mean? What does it mean to be dynamic? High level, untyped, interpreted. What is that? That's some characteristics of a programming language. So what is that? So anyone know what does it mean to be, for instance, untyped or dynamic? Do you know that? Or interpreted? Any idea? Not? Come on! Wake up, class! Yeah?
Untyped means it means it's not typed. It means like it doesn't have. We don't deal with like ints, strings when you declare variables.
Yeah. So does it mean doesn't have types, or does it mean that we do not need to declare types?
We do not need to declare types.
Okay, so we have types. Yeah. So that's important. There's types in the language, but we don't have to define the type. And like in C#, if you have made a variable and you have said that this variable is an integer, it stays an integer for the rest of its life. You cannot change the type of a variable, but you can do that in an untyped language. What about being a dynamic language? What does that mean? So what is making a language dynamic? Is C# a dynamic language? That's a simple yes or no. So 50-50 chance for saying the right thing. No? No, why not?
Yeah, because you have to follow specific rules.
Yeah, but you also have to follow rules in JavaScript.
Yeah.
Less rules, but
JavaScript doesn't contain some sort of guidelines. You can just write. You don't have to follow specific patterns.
But you can. Yeah. Do you have to follow patterns in C#?
No.
Yeah, you're right. C# is a static language, but so we just have to figure out what is the difference. What does this mean, dynamic versus static?
No.
Any suggestions to what that could mean to be a dynamic language? So, one example: can you change the object in C# after you have instantiated? Can you add more attributes or properties or stuff to the object after you created it in C#? Is that possible? So can you create a person and then get this person object that is instantiated? That's John, and then you think, okay, John needs an age, but the class doesn't have age, so I just add an age attribute to the class. Can you do that? No, cannot do that. Can you do that in JavaScript? What?
Yeah. Yes.
Yes, easily. that's actually part of how you do JavaScript. You just don't have classes in JavaScript. So yeah.
Isn't an example could it be if you have your downloaded, let's say for example you have a div, then you can when the div is loaded, you have a color red. You can with JavaScript you can change it to blue.
Yeah, but that's not something about the JavaScript. That's not the programming language. That's just part of HTML that you can change. So that will just be. You change an attribute on the DOM and then you ask the browser to re-render the DOM. So that's nothing. That's not part of the JavaScript language. But of course it has this dynamic idea of changing something. But that's more on the browser / HTML than it's on JavaScript. So it's also because you can interpret it. You can postpone the checking of everything until, or actually it's always postponed until runtime. So you don't have any compiler. That's it's interpreted language, so you don't compile JavaScript. So you don't have this problem that you can postpone the evaluation of your stuff until runtime, and you can actually execute a string of JavaScript on runtime. So you can have a variable with some JavaScript and then execute it on runtime. So you can ask the user to get some JavaScript code and then you can execute it right away. That's more difficult in C#. It's doable, but it's a little bit more complicated. So what about these levels in programming language? What does that mean? What does it mean when a programming language is on a higher level? So that if you have a higher level language, you can also have a low level language. So what is that? What do we talk about in levels here? Yeah?
Because you compare with something like assembly language.
Yeah, so what is assembly language? Is that a high or low level?
No.
It's low. It's kind of like it's talked directly to the computer. It's a close to core level.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yes, you get closer and closer to the structure and architecture of the physical machine. So if you go to assembler, what you do is actually you're moving data around in the registers inside the machine. So you say, okay, this piece of the memory should actually we want to move an integer into that, and then we move an integer into that, and then we add these two and move into another. So that's on a very low level, and it's very difficult to make huge programs in assembler. So how many of you have done assembly programming?
Pascal.
Only Pascal. Pascal is on the same level as a C or so it's still a lower level language than Java, JavaScript and C#, but it's not on the assembly level. But I also did some Pascal when I was starting, and whenever you want to. It was before they had graphical user interfaces. So whenever you want to do something with the mouse in Pascal, you have to do some assembler code, because the only way you could do that was actually to address the memory where the mouse was running on the computer, and then do something like that. So the high level means that you get more and more abstraction from the physical architecture of the computer. So when we did programming in C#, we didn't think about memory, for instance, because memory is allocated for you. You don't think about how the instructions are executed inside the computer, but you do that. That's what you do in assembly. You write the instructions directly. So that's the high level of JavaScript. So it's on the higher level than C and also than Java and C# actually. So if you compare C# and JavaScript, you can see C# is strongly typed. You cannot do anything without a type. JavaScript is not. It's static. You cannot change so it's compiled, and you have whenever you have a class, it's defined. So you cannot change that. You cannot change the variable from one type to another, while JavaScript is dynamic. And then you have classical inheritance in C#. We don't have we have prototypical inheritance in JavaScript. I will return to talk a little bit about what that is later. And then we have classes, constructors, and methods in C#. And then in the similar part of JavaScript is functions, and functions. So even though you can do function stuff in C#, it's not on the same level from a functional point of view as JavaScript is. So functions in JavaScript are actually pure first-class member of the language. It's not the same in C# or in Java or in C++ or whatever language, but in JavaScript it's a first-class member. We'll talk about that a little bit more. So, but if you look at the latest version of JavaScript, so that's the ES6 or JavaScript 2015. That's actually classes and constructors added to the language, but it's not classes in the same sense as classes in C# because we don't get class inheritance. So it's more like syntactic sugar on top of JavaScript. It's more like a lot of people coming from the object-oriented world, moving into JavaScript and find themselves in trouble understanding the functional part of JavaScript. So I think that's more the reason for introducing classes. Whether it's a good thing or a bad thing is something that is debated a lot. So you have two different opinions, of course. People that say that it's very important to get classes into JavaScript, so it's easier for object-oriented programmers to program in a language. And then we have other parts say no, it's very, very bad to get classes into JavaScript because JavaScript is not a class-based language. So classes will be something weird, and if people get classes into the JavaScript, we have the problem that a lot of people will never ever learn how to do real JavaScript programming because that's not classes, that's with functions and blah blah blah. So a lot of debate going on there, but it's there, so you can use that. We'll see that. So the types in JavaScript pretty much did what you expect. Except that there's just one number, so you don't have an integer and a float and a double and blah blah blah. You only have one number. So have one type. So that's the a float or a double or whatever. That is the floating point number. Then you have string, boolean, symbols are new. We don't talk. If you want to know something about that, it's the dynamic. Due to the dynamics of JavaScript, sometimes you need to add to an object some new properties, and you want to be sure that you can add a property that's not that will not conflict with the properties that's already there, and then symbols are providing a unique way of doing that. But they will not go there. Then you have objects, so it's an object-oriented language, very much an object-oriented language, but it's not a class-based language. So we have some predefined objects. We have functions, we have arrays, we have date, we have regular expressions, and so on. So that's part of the language. Then we have a null and an undefined. It's a little bit weird that there's a null and an undefined. But the idea is that undefined is used by the interpreter to signal that something's wrong, and null is used like we use it in C#. That I think that's if you try to figure out why they have these two levels, the idea. I don't think that many people use nulls in JavaScript. It's more undefined all the time. But you can use null. So did you know that JavaScript? Did you know the story about JavaScript? Do you know when it was created and how it was created and by whom? Do you know that? Have you heard that story? Not that I will start telling a story about that, but so the story is: do you know Netscape? Do you have that's one of the first browsers. So if you have been around back in the last decade or some decades before that, so So you know Netscape, because Netscape is what is Mozilla now, and Firefox. So that's that line. They made the first, or not the first, but they made the browser that changed the world, because there was also Internet Explorer at that time, but then they made a free open source browser that was Netscape, and in 96 or 7 or something like that, they needed a language inside the browser so they could do some stuff inside the browser. So that's just specific Netscape. And then they asked this guy, could you please come up with a programming language? And yeah, he did that. He worked on the language for 10 days, and then that's all. So JavaScript is created in 10 days.
Yeah, and he took the name that time because Java was a popular.
Yeah, so everything was about Java back there in the middle of the 90s. So the language should be something with Java. So with JavaScript, it has nothing to do with Java. It's not even close to Java. It's very far from Java. But he made the language in 10 days, and then after making it back in the I think it was 98 or 97 or something like that. Doesn't matter. Then for the next decade or something, nobody heard about, did something about JavaScript, because Java was so hot at that time. But then around the millennium, when you started to do asynchronous communication, then you wanted to manipulate the DOM, and then suddenly, we already have a language that can do that, and then JavaScript was reintroduced, and you know the story from there. It's just going in that direction. It's probably I don't know, I haven't seen any figures, but it's probably the most used programming language in the world. I don't know, but yeah. But since it's made in 10 days, so it's not a language where they sat down for a long time and thought about what would be good and bad parts of a programming language, and then blah blah blah. So this guy actually had some ideas, so he just followed his own preferences, and then I think he's called Brandon, and he did that in 10 days. I think that's by itself an achievement to be able to create a new programming language in 10 days. But of course we have the legacy of that. I will try to show you some small video here. I don't know if you already know it, but anyway, so this is.
All right, good. You guys know what WAT means? WAT. Exactly. Let's talk about JavaScript. Does anyone know in JavaScript what array plus array is? Well, let me ask you this first. What should array plus array be? Empty array, I would also accept type error. That is not what array plus array is. Wrong. Wrong. Array plus array is empty string. Obviously, I think it's obvious to everyone. Now, what would array plus object be? This should obviously be type error because those are completely disparate types. Does anyone know what this is? No. Close. No. Far away. It's object.
So this is just an empty array in JavaScript, and this is an empty object. So that's just an object with no attribute. So just so you know that.
Nicely done. Now, of course, because this is plus, so you can flip the operands and the same thing comes out. So if we do, what? No, that's just an object. If you do object plus array, you should get exactly the same thing, which, as you can see, you do. And finally, the only one of these that's actually true is, because you add arrays, you get empty string, that doesn't make sense. But an object plus an object is actually not a number, technically. So this one's actually right. And exactly, right? Like, what is even going on in this lab? I don't even understand what person with a brain in their head would think that any of this is a good idea. Okay. Enough making fun of languages that suck. Let's talk about JavaScript. if I say array.new 16, or just array 16, I get an array of 16 things, which it represents as 16 commas, which is obvious. And if I then join those with a string, then I get the string 16 times. This is actually the only line in this entire presentation that's reasonable. Now, if I take that string and then add a 1 to it, it interprets the 1 as, or casts the 1 to his string, and then we get WAP1 a bunch of times, fine. Does anyone know what will happen if I subtract 1 from the string? I'm assuming no one does. I'll give you a hint. Does this help? Does anyone know?